Look at you pulling that up.
I'm just having a good time, Thomas. We get to talk linebackers today. You and I, after last show's like miscommunication, we talk corners. And then to be honest with you, it's funny. You live enough life, and you're like, I understand why these things happen now. After watching this linebacker class, I can totally understand why you wanted to talk corners Monday.
Yeah, it's underwhelming. I mean, I think there are some going to be some solid contributors, of course. I don't know. Does anyone go in the first round of the linebackers? I don't believe off-ball linebackers. I don't. Second, I think there's going to be some stretches in the second. I think there's going to be a number of ones that ideally people would want to be taken in the third round. But remember, we talk about this all the time. You're like, when you're looking at these guys, you're like, no, he's a third rounder. Before you know it, they start coming off the board, and the guys are being popped in the middle of the second. So,
yeah, it's one of those positions, Thomas, where I think I think that the evaluators are looking for something maybe a little bit different than the public. Like last year, the first linebacker off the board, was Quay Walker, which or no, it was and it's like Quay Walker, or at least he was like 22nd. I can't remember who went, if somebody went before him, whether Devin Lloyd went before him or not. But like the Quay Walker was not in anybody's first round mock at first, right? And he hit, when they opened up his market in Vegas, it was 40 and a half or so was his number. And when I think about that, it's like, why? It's like, well, you look at Quay Walker, he's like this big, tall, athletic thing, was not the best player on his Georgia defense, but had a bunch of traits. And he kind of snuck up on us during the draft process. And to me, it's an example of, this is just a position where when I watch all these guys that we're going to talk about today, they're not doing things at the college level that I think that they're going to do at the NFL level. It's such a projection. Like when I watch Drew Sanders, he's coming off the edge as a rusher. He's blitzing. He's doing a lot of things that he's not going to get the luxury to do as, a middle of the pack player on his own defense that he was, when you look at Arkansas, him being the best player probably on that defense, he's able to do sort of things that allow him to shine. When I look at other guys like who are in the slot more often, they're not going to be able to do that in the NFL, but they're shining doing that sort of super athletic thing in college. And so to me, as somebody who like isn't an evaluator from that perspective, it's just so hard for me because I'm watching them. I'm like, that's not how a linebacker in the NFL plays.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of pomp about linebackers, right? When you look back and you're going to go into this exercise in a little bit and ask, obviously you're going to, start talking about who your best linebackers who were not only that played with you, but like who you were around, who you grew up loving as a linebacker and the style that you grew up. I mean, it's such a cool position over the years that you used to look at when we all were growing up. Of course, we're all going to date ourselves at times because some of the guys that we'll be talking about would be like historically badass linebackers, throwing their butts around, doing all kinds of crazy stuff, flying around, making big time plays, making plays on the ball in the run and in the pass, to your point. And yes, there are some really good football players and linebackers in the league right now. We could go on and on about them. Some of those guys will come up in our discussion today. But those old school linebackers like Mike Singletary and Jack Lambert, I mean, those are the guys that stand out in your minds. They weren't necessarily pretty athletes, but they were, downhill players who would just tear it up. And I will say, before we get on to this, talking about this year's guys, I mean, I was always so keen on trying to get that second tier leader, the one that was just going to lead it all from that inside backer position. And we never, I'll put my hands up, we were never able to do that in Atlanta. And our linebacker groups over the years, we had some good linebackers here and there, but they weren't linebackers that people in this league were talking about, right? There were some good linebackers. They would have some flashes and some shining, and then they would settle in, right? Or we would cut them because they weren't worth the money, or we would move on from them because they weren't worth the money necessarily.
Well, it's just such a tough position, right, Thomas? Because now I think you're being hard on yourself. I remember a certain Thursday night game in 2017 where Deion Jones went up and snagged an interception from Breeze in the end zone that was, pretty nice. And like, he had moments, where I thought that he was going to be, kind of that everything linebacker. But I think what's interesting is what you brought up, which is something that I'm not able to see, is it's the leadership part too, right? Like I look at, the team that like I love watching the most, Kansas City, where like Nick Bolton is the lesser of the two athletes between him and Willie Gay, two guys that they took in round 2 back-to-back years, Gay in 2020, Bolton in 2021. Bolton's not as athletic, not as flashy, not as rangy, but he wears the green dot. He's on the field all the time. So when you get into your dime packages where you take out your two other linebackers and you put in defensive backs, in a weird way, Willie Gay type athlete should be on the field in that time, but a Nick Bolton type leader is on the field at that time. And so, and I truly think like this is why the position has been so devalued, because, when you think about a Brian Urlacher, you have the leadership, but you also have the athleticism and talent to go on with it. I mean, we're talking about quarterback is the sort of same thing. It's like you can only go so far with you can only do so much with Jeff George at quarterback, right? A guy who's got all the physical tools, but leadership was always said to be lacking. Linebacker is sort of the same thing, right? Like I look at guys like Jones and Campbell and, even Oluokun to a certain extent. Like I think of all those as good football players. But to your point is like, are they the leader of the defense? And, or are they waiting for somebody else to step up? And those are things that like we're also trying to evaluate in this draft.
Yeah, and yeah, we could talk on and on about the other elements that you're looking for in a linebacker, of course. I mean, look, we talked about it when we were talking about linebackers. Those are the people, the Deion Joneses of the world. When we were drafting players like that, we drafted him at I think I'd mentioned to everyone about 223, maybe, ran really well. When he got to the Falcons and he started playing for us, we were playing with guys. He was 212, 13. There were times when he was down to like 209 pounds for a backer that we were looking to pay a ton of money to. It's unbelievable. And yet he could fly around. He could cover guys. We would put him up against, the really fast guys in our division. But he also got eaten up at times when big O linemen would engulf him. So, I mean, I remember back when I first got in the GM role in 2008, we took Curtis Lofton. Curtis Lofton was, he was just one of those old school guys, right? Lumbering guy, would bring it downhill, just unload on people when he got there, of course. And then every once in a while, Mike Nolan might put him out there on Reggie Bush, and we had no chance whatsoever. But that was the backer that we had out there, right? So you get misaligned and mismatched at times. You have the light guy who can run with anyone, but he gets completely annihilated in the run game and gets engulfed. And then you get the guy who can take people on. And it's a really interesting position. I would say, you mentioned it a couple minutes ago, it is one of the tougher positions to truly evaluate because it's so scheme related, right? And so scheme and important and designated. When we start thinking about the scheme that you're playing, you could go out as a scouting group and you could evaluate a whole bunch of linebackers and rate them, and rank them. But then your coaches come in and you're like, hey, by the way, we're changing from this scheme to this scheme, and we're going to do this with that backer. I know he's a good athlete, but here's our stack. All of a sudden you're sitting there thinking the top 10 of the coaches versus the top 10 of the scouts who have gone out before the scheme change. That's a difficult thing.
Well, and that's the mark of a position you don't want to draft high, right? Where I call it the inefficient market, right? Where I think if you survey 32 general managers in the NFL right now, they're all going to have some ordering of Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, Jalen Carter, top 3 kind of edge interior defensive linemen, right? If you survey, I just showed you, and I like Chris Sims a lot. He's a very nice guy. Obviously, his dad was a great NFL quarterback, but like he had a completely different list than we had, right? And I appreciate his independent. I know he gets made fun of a little bit for having different opinions, but you actually like having guys having different opinions because it causes you to challenge your own. And with linebacker, it's just all over the place, right? And I think running back after Bijan Robinson is sort of the same, which is again why you don't necessarily want to draft them high, because there's so much uncertainty. You don't want to be so certain in your evaluation that you overpay for a player when there are other players for which your evaluation might be a little bit tighter. So,
look, I want, before we go on the Chris Sims things, you probably can't bring it up, but I think it's worth talking about. Where he's going, right? We have Sanders and Campbell by way of your list. I'm not throwing you under the bus, but I mean,
Yeah, these are the way the market goes, by the way. So I didn't put on grinding the mocks because frankly there are only 3 linebackers that are eligible for grinding the mocks. So I didn't feel like it was worth doing, but yeah, Sanders and Campbell are basically odds on even to be the first linebacker taken.
Yeah. But then you look at his, and he's talking about Daiyan Henley and Trenton Simpson. Those guys are will backers. They're, well, one of them is for sure. When you talk about Simpson, I mean, Daiyan does his stuff. We'll talk about him when we talk about these guys. They're not like top notch, far from it. They have their positives and they fly around and they're aggressive and make some plays, of course. But yeah, I am just saying it's a bear very often because you pick people up just like us. I mean, we had Devondre Campbell. We liked him. There were a lot of things we liked about him. He played well for us. We let him go in free agency, goes and does his thing. He thrives in another system. It's just a really interesting position. It means that, just so everyone knows this, it is imperative that the scouting staff sits down with the coordinator and the linebacker coach and really talks about the nuances truly wanted for that position. Not only the inside guys, but the outside guys as well. If you don't know, man, you can make a ton. You have a lot of a chance.
And the thing that the hard part about defense is, unlike offense, you don't get to dictate situation, right? So the thing about running backs, like we talked in the running back session about, you had Devontae Freeman, then you had Tevin Coleman, and like Tevin Coleman could play in these situations, and the beauty of that is, unless a guy gets hurt on offense, you can dictate those situations. You play who the player you want to, right? But on defense, you're matching up against what the offense is doing, right? So if you draft a will and the other team's going to come out in 10 personnel or 11 personnel with an athletic tight end, and you're going to always be in dime, like either you just drafted somebody who's going to get 50% play time at the ceiling because you're not going to like there's rare exceptions, but you're not going to match up 10 personnel with nickel on 3rd and long or early downs unless your linebackers are truly special. And so you've just drafted somebody that the other team has dictated that you're not playing. And that's really tough. Whereas, the Mike guys, they can play, like I talk about, Nick Bolton, they're playing all the time, but again, they have their limitations too. And so that's also what makes this hard, is that it's not only scheme, right? Scheme matters a ton. Like whether or not this guy's going to be the guy that scrapes to the run or the guy that sits back on play action. Like you watch the tracking data and those guys, they're in tandem, like all that stuff. And whether, if you got a guy that's this guy, you can't draft another guy that's this guy. Right. And so, there's a ton there, but there's also the situation that the offense puts you in that is beyond your control. And you want as many players who are impervious to that as possible. And linebacker is just a hard position for you to have that.
Yeah, and very well said. And look, I'm a big believer in athleticism, as I mentioned to you. And when you get these longer levered guys at times, quite often more than not, they're longer, they're overrunning, their ability to kind of get back into the game and recover is not, they're not change of direction type of player. They're not what we call reactionary athletes, right? The reactionary athleticism that we're looking at from some of these guys that can break down, gather themselves and, play through trash, et cetera, et cetera. That's a quality that is needed in today's world, right? To be able to sift through everything, be able to scrape, come up and make the play. Some of these guys we'll be talking about today, long levers, long legs, and they're fine out in space and they're rangy when they're going straight ahead. But of course they have limitations. That's just purely from an athleticism standpoint, of course.
So we're going to give you all a treat at the end. Thomas and I are going to talk about either a combination of our favorite or our best linebackers. I'm going to go with favorite just because I think it makes it, for me, more fun to go back and be like, I know this guy wasn't a top 5 linebacker of all time, but I really enjoyed watching him play. But we're going to get on this group. We are going to talk about 5 guys. We're going to be a little bit more brief in this one, just because we know that they're not top picks, the way that some of these other guys are. So let's start with Drew Sanders of Arkansas. 6'4", 235, 32-inch arms. Didn't work out at the combine. 11, almost 1,200 career snaps, but the majority of them last year. which is what I want to ask you a question about in a second here. He was involved in 11 sacks, 39 pressures. And when I watched him in film, that's what I saw. I saw a guy who was kind of rushing when he made plays, it was rushing the passer. It was that kind of thing. And I didn't see as many plays where him just lining up and kind of being a linebacker. And so when I look at his, I thought he hit well. I thought he finished well as a spy. He's got great athleticism and from what I could see on film. But when I look at him, I'm saying almost 80, basically like 2/3 to 70% of his snaps in his career were played last year. We don't have a big sample on him other than last year. And a lot of it was played kind of differently than I think a team's going to play him when they draft him this year. Those are my concerns.
So talking about long, right? You're talking about long lever and long movement and rangy guy who can make some plays when he's going, downhill, of course. He can run through. He's got, good sense to him and good understanding of the game, of course. To your point, he made a lot of plays when he was rushing. I get that. He was disruptive that way. He'll nut up and knock some people around, of course. I still think, at 35, I think, he's still light for a guy who's, what did we say, he was 6'4"?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's gonna have to put on some weight. And I don't see him as a quick twitch guy. It's not like, he's gaining ground, right? He's rangy. I'm still not sure on both of these longer guys that we're going to be talking about here, how they truly will, be in pass coverage. What truly is their ability to drop, plant and go. They don't look as though they are as comfortable as they should be in that role. I mean, look, it's not that, there's a lot of players that are tall like that who are limited that way. I mean, when we first started watching Devondre Campbell, and those of you who have watched him, I mean, he is a very good athlete for a big body. I think when you compare him, only because he's in my mind from a big, long guy that you want to say, gosh, he's limited. Drew Sanders has limitations that way. I don't see Drew Sanders. You use the word as a great athlete. You know me with superlatives, so I'm not necessarily agreeing with that. I think he's an adequate athlete. There are hints of good athleticism for him, but he has his limitations as well. So, is he a guy that goes in the middle of the second? Where does he go? I don't know what was the projection here in
it was basically like mid 30s to mid 40s was the projection. So,
okay.
I think that there are some, I would be super surprised if he went in the first round. I do think what you said, did kind of trigger like, a little bit of, there's a little bit of that concern I have is where when you see him really get up to speed, it's from depth, right? And that's troubling to a certain extent, right? Because when you and I'm a tall guy, it always took me a little bit longer too, but it's like, when are you ever going to simulate that at the NFL level, right? And when are you ever it's going to be more few and far between than it would be at a place like Arkansas, right? Where it takes him a while to get up to speed. And you're seeing that a lot with him rushing the passer. You really don't have, if there's an athletic tight end running up the seam against him or a running back running an arrow route on him, he doesn't get the opportunity to sort of make, catch up that way.
But he makes some plays. I mean, there's no question about it. He's got some disruption to him, of course. He will. I feel like he can find the ball and go to it, of course. He's just one of those guys that's not, he's not overwhelming. He's not a guy that's grabbing your attention where you're like, I need this cat on my team. So it'll be interesting to see. Like you said, middle of the second round, I could see him going. I could see a team who's looking for an outside backer, to potentially play him in that spot, of course.
Yeah. A reminder that first round linebackers have not been great investments in the last, for a long time, just because of positional value and stuff. So, that also is going against him in terms of being picked high. Jack Campbell, linebacker. This is an Iowa linebacker name, right? Jack Campbell. Like this is a Iowa 6'5", 249. This is bringing you back, right? 6'5" is a little tall for a linebacker, I will say, but 249 is kind of like that was the tail of the tape back when you were starting out with the Falcons and obviously when you were with the Patriots as well. But in pretty explosive tests, right? When you look at 37.5-inch vert, 4.65 in the 40, 10 foot 8-inch broad, check some boxes that you wouldn't expect from a guy. When you watch him on film, I put down, I think he's solid. He has an eye for the football. He forced a lot of, turnovers when he was playing in Iowa. He got 15 pressures, missed only 12 tackles. Sanders missed 22 last year. So when I look at it, I think a very solid contributor. And, I can see why some people would have him above Sanders in the ranking.
Yeah, he's to me, he's got prototypical Iowa to him. Of course, you heard me talking the other day. I mean, I love what that program does. They are always ready, by the way, even though they don't have the same strength coach. If you remember what happened a few years ago, but they've always been very dialed in on training their guys for the combine. So I get your point. Good numbers. They're going to be ready for their numbers, even though they're going to max out what they can max out. They may not transfer that to the field as much. I mean, Jack, if you watch any of the videos, whether it's on YouTube or wherever it is, they, calling him Captain Jack, he's all of that, right? In the sense of he's the guy there. He comes up, he's a guy that's going to blow through people, of course, with what'd you say, 245. I mean, he's a big guy coming downhill for sure. Another guy like Sanders who's making plays for that team. People the team revolves around him, the leadership element of what he does. But I think he's gangly. Back to the same thing. He's not the smooth guy who's going to drop and stay in phase when he has to cover someone. Don't put him on a quick twitch running back. Of course, even an adept tight end who might run routes with some wiggle. It's not going to be easy for him. Change of direction. That whole quick movement recovery element is not him either. Of course, purely like you might see in some of these other linebackers we're talking about. So, is this guy third round? Where does he projecting to go right now? He seems to me like a lot of people would love to snap him up in the third round.
Yeah, top 50-ish. A little bit later in some. I have to look at the latest and grinding the mocks. But yeah, you're looking at a little bit below where Sanders is supposed to go, which I think makes some sense. But yeah, I kind of like him. But like again, it's interesting because if you draft a linebacker in the third round, you're going to want that guy to start, right? It's sort of different than quarterback and like some of the more premium positions where the guy, the later on in the draft, the guys are depth guys. Linebackers like taking that late are going to be starting guys, and so. When you just a quick question before we move on to the next guy, but like when you're trying to discern whether not a guy's a leader, what are some of the tools that you have at your disposal as an evaluator when you're trying to say, can this guy be a Mike linebacker? For Mike being like, can the guy wear the green dot for my defense?
Oftentimes, of course, just so everyone knows, I mean, we do our psychological tests, we do our own interviews, of course. With not only the coaching staff, but a lot of people, we have a number of scouts that go in are dealing with personnel within their program that are going to provide us with a lot of that. We'll sit down with these players and pepper them at all levels with, everything to do from, all the personality traits that they are, how they respond to certain situations, what do-overs they would have, what their main learned experiences were as a leader. We, again, some of these guys are prepared and they may come to the table with some great answers and others aren't. I mean, to actually walk them through and have them walk us through, tell us when you truly led, tell us, tell us a situation, what you did or what you could have done better in a leadership situation, all the while understanding that we have a pretty firm grasp of what their true leadership is from all the people that we have dealt with before we actually interview the kids. So and then you, of course, watch on the field. Scouts oftentimes want to be down on the field for leadership types, either close by or being able to walk on the sidelines when they're allowed in some of these games to truly hear these guys interacting. And we will watch. We'll not only watch if we can't get down, but we'll watch with our binocs down there and see this, some of these guys along the sideline when they're off the field. What are they doing? Are they one side of the field? Are they are they mingling with their group? Are they cheering their team on? Like, what is their makeup, right? That's an important thing. So when we're trying, but there are a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, I think that those things are so important when it comes to a position that numerically is going to get a bad rap for value, right? Like there's these things that have to be intangible to a position like linebacker. as the league continues to sort of move, even to the point, Thomas, where like now a lot of safeties wear the communication because they're on the field more and linebackers are more interchangeable. So that's just something like I think is really important. And obviously analytics, like we have indirect ways of measuring it, but I don't think we're any good at it yet. Which is the game.
Well, and I will say to your point, you're more right. When I say third round, ideally he's a third, but you know what I've said is probably a half a round up, and there's a dearth of linebackers out there, as you know.
Yeah.
When they're not projected to go in the first round, man, there's what happens then is people realize like, wow, there are no true like full on Mac Daddy backers out there. So let's start focusing in the middle of the second. Some of those guys that might have gone later. It might go.
Yeah, grinding the mocks had him moved up to 45.5 or so, which seems high. But, the thing about second round picks is those players don't have to be complete. When I think about a first round pick, I think of that guy has to play every down, right? Especially at a position like linebacker, even running back. Like a guy can't be a 2-down running back if you're going to take him in the first round, if you take him at all. Later on, I can see some deficiencies and work around them. And that's been the Patriot paradigm, right? Which has been to say, later round picks, we're going to find guys that do the exact thing that we, and then we're not going to care about anything else. Or that's hyperbolic, but like it's sort of like do the things that we're good at, that you're good at. And if you have deficiencies in other places, we can work around them because we're so good at scheme. And like that, has done them well. Trenton Simpson of Clemson, 6'2", 235, 32.4-inch arms, 4.43 in the 40. Did 25 reps of bench. Impressive there. He had 31 pressures in 2021, just 16 last year. So they kind of had him play, didn't have him blitz as much. He had more stops in 2021, 35. And when we say stops, this is an analytical thing. We have expected points added, which is basically saying, did you get closer to scoring or further away? A stop is a tackle where the offense gets further away from scoring. So it could be like a 2-yard gain, a 3-yard gain, a minus 3-yard gain, but it can't be like a 7-yard gain on 1st and 10. So that's kind of distinguishing good tackles from whatever tackles. He had only 29 in 2022. So the guy got a little bit less productive this year than he was a season ago. He was another one where he rushed the passer a lot in his film. I thought he was decent at fighting through blocks in the run game, but I'm really curious to hear what you think, Thomas.
So is Trenton, by the way, is he a junior or is he's not a senior, is he? I thought.
Good question. I think you're right. I think you only had the 3 years at Clemson.
Right. So while you're looking that up, look, I mean, he's a will linebacker. I mean, he's a guy, obviously he can smoke it, man. He can roll. There's no question. Yep. When you watch him, that stands out. He can make plays. He's coming downhill a lot. We call a downhill player, of course. He's a see and go type of dude for sure. I think he's got a solid awareness. I'd love to be able to spend more time and truly dig in and see what that is. Some of the things that I'm a little more concerned about is with a guy this size and a guy this speed, right? He's got straight line speed, but there is some rigidity in his movement at times that is concerning, because when you see a guy like this and who's explosive and can run like this and is around this size, you're hoping that he's got that very good athleticism about him, right? Where he can not only drop, because I guess what I was saying, watching him drop, he's just got some rigidity in his drop, like I've been saying about all these guys. And I feel like I'm singing the same tune, but there are a lot of linebackers out there, some are a little more rigid than others. Some can even not look that good when they're dropping, but they're able to jam it and go. He does have that ability to come out and close. When you watch this guy, I mean, big old legs. I mean, these Clemson guys are trained well, right? They look really good. If you watch them in the combine workout, I mean, just big old honking legs and rocked up and doing all that. Again, I'm just concerned how it will be in the open field for someone like this, because you're gonna expect this kid to play and significantly contribute on special teams, and it's not all about that, right? You're gonna have to make sure that you can do your business in the open field. I think he's a good football player, but again, there are some limitations from a guy that maybe at this position I'd expect to be more fluid and explosively athletic.
Yeah, grinding the mocks has him at 47.6 expected draft position, which feels high. I remember So you said Clemson. I have some PTSD about Clemson linebackers. Chiefs drafted Dorian O'Daniel in the 3rd round in 2018. And to your point, like, fine special teams guy, could run down on all 4 phases, but like didn't get a second contract in the NFL. Like, he's out of the league, 4 and done, which is like rare, right? When you're a top, 90 to 100 pick. And, it's just one of those things where all the deficiencies you talked about, great athlete, looked really good on the field. It gave him opportunities. And that linebacking core for the Chiefs, like, newsflash, was not, we're not talking about like, Donnie Edwards and, all the, like, this was a linebacking core that you could have started for if you had some competency, and like, it just wasn't there. And it was all kind of what you were talking about, which is super impressive, athlete guy. But when the lights came on, no one was home. And it was just like, an issue, right? And to me, this is a kind of bearing my soul a little bit, because when we get to this next guy, every single time I've had a bad eval on a linebacker, when I've asked somebody, they were like, yeah, in college, they asked him to do one thing, and he was amazing at it because he was a better athlete than everybody else, and that's what's showing up in your data. And when I asked it, when we tried to see him play, we tried to see him context switch, it was a disaster, right? And when you're a linebacker in the NFL, you're gonna have to constantly context switch because you're not as great of an athlete, and that you have to do more things. And that is a place where I think, again, traditional scouting, sort of wins the day, and as of now, of course.
Yeah, I think going into this next guy, it will be interesting to see what you have to say. This is truly Chris Sims's guy, right? This is his number.
So this is where I'm gonna name a player, because I feel like you're very upfront about some of your misses. I'm gonna name your miss that I had, but this is Daiyan Henley from Washington State. He came via Nevada, so he was a member of the Wolfpack before he was a member of Wazoo. And which they're also Wolfpack, right?
What? No. Cougars. The Cougars.
Cougars. That's right. Yeah. It's late. Okay. 6'1", 225, 33-inch arms, 4.54 in the 40, 35-inch vert, 10 broad. So fine numbers there. He had 1,700 career snaps, 666 in 2022. He was involved in 5 sacks. He had 40 stops in each of the last 2 years, which is pretty productive. He only had 5 missed tackles last year, the whole year, which I thought was great. But when I watched this film, I got some big-time Daiyan Taylor vibes. And Daiyan Taylor was the guy that I thought was going to be the next coming. And he very well could be still. I'm not closing the door. One of, some of my favorite people in the league, the Eagles, they drafted him 3rd round. But Daiyan Taylor was a guy, when he played for Colorado, athletic as hell, fast, played in the slot, and was amazing at it, right? And when he got to the NFL, and I asked around about him, and I asked, like, or when are you going to take Daiyan Taylor? Like, he seems really good to me. They're like, doesn't know how to play the position, right? And so I get concerned when I see Henley when he's playing over the slot player all the time, because he's athletic as heck for a linebacker. When you get to the NFL, there's going to be somebody who's more athletic than you playing over the slot. So you got to be able to play Sam, Will, or Mike, mostly Mike and Will, and I have questions.
Do you think this guy's a 3-down player?
I don't. I don't, but I don't know what he's doing on the first 2. Like, the problem is like, so is he just going to come in? Is he going to be a sub backer? Is he going to be a guy that comes in the smaller packages?
Which is tough, because, look, I have my feelings about him as well. I think, look, he's another downhill guy. That's why, like, I keep looking at these linebackers and I'm like, gosh, where are the guys that I really want out on the field to cover, the stud athletes, right? The really explosive athletes who can move, who can stay in phase. This guy rips it up inside. You've seen it. He is, I saw someone reporting on him saying I think he was like a raucous or rambunctious type of player. He is, right? He'll throw himself around and he's making plays. He's a rough and tough guy, I think. What was his weight? 2.25?
225. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he's making plays where you look at him, you're thinking, wow, this guy's got to be a little bit bigger than that. But again, I think he's more of a straight line guy. I don't see him. Did you see do you have his numbers by chance there from the combine? Do you have his three cone at all? Is it close?
He doesn't have those from the combine, which I think is actually telling, right? Like, probably probably sat out that event for a reason.
Yeah. I'm just surprised, and I wonder where Chris is talking about him. Where is he projected right now? He's just another guy that is, again, I love what he does, and I love his style of play as far as being a tough ass and throwing himself around and making plays. I do. He's a special teamer in this league, of course. He's got to be there. He's got to be running down and lighting people up. But there are going to be some questions when it's truly open field. Although you said, I saw that, you said he only had 5 misses. Is that correct?
He's only had 15 missed tackles the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yep.
So like there is some value, and the fact is, like, look, when the Eagles took Taylor in round 3, like, this is a team that I think from a evaluator and an analytics perspective does about as well as anybody in the league. And they see, and obviously Taylor hasn't been great for them, but like they saw a value there. The Stats Life production, I think, is he says round 3 is a good value for Henley. Like, I think, like, if he can avoid some of the pitfalls, right, and he can learn the position, it's just really hard, Thomas, right? Like, if you're going to literally teach the guy some new things about football when he's trying to play against professionals, to me, that's just a really hard, way to go anywhere but round 3. Now, I think from my perspective, Chris Sims is probably saying none of these guys are starters. None of these guys are 3-down players. And so I'm going to pick the guy who, in a perfect world where I can coach the guy up and get him into a, this is the best athlete to work with. And maybe that's the case, because when what you've said of the top 3 guys are kind of long, the top 2 guys, at least, long guys, take a while to, and we're not running 200-meter dashes here. We're trying to cover running backs and tight ends. So, maybe that's what he sees here. But to me, when I watch the film, like, and you get PTSD over, like, your sort of, not to be, but you get that over some of your bad evals in my case. And I got that when I saw Henley there. So last but not least, Alabama via Tennessee, Henry Toyoto. 6'1", 227, 32.75 inch arms, 4.62 in the 40, 32-inch vertical, almost 10-foot broad. He had 3,200 snaps. And I'm only going to bring up this up once just because I've said my piece about their grades, but he graded poorly in the PFF system all but 1 year. And he has 33 missed tackles in the last 2 years. So there's some 33 missed tackles last 2 years.
Right.
So, he did have 49 stops. He looked, and again, this is just, my naked eye, but he looked small on film. That was the thing that popped out to me the most. And so, like, I wrote down kind of when I thought about his comp, I thought Eric Kendricks, like a poor man's Eric Kendricks, but that's again my untrained eye to an extent.
Yeah, look, he's not a big guy, of course. I think he's a De La Salle guy, right? I think he's, as far as California, coming through a good program, obviously had a great program collegiately. He's a good college football player in my mind. I mean, Nick is not going to play someone there that doesn't have a good understanding of the game. He's not a thump guy. I mean, look, the reality at 32 vert and shy of 10 broad jump, those aren't the numbers you're wanting. Of course, he's a 4.62 guy. So he's got some OA to him, right? He's got some overachiever to him. Overachiever's funny because when we talk about overachievers at time, when we're working for Sumer Sports, bring on all you overachievers. We love you. But when you're talking about paying these guys to help you win the Super Bowl, you can only have so many overachievers, right? And there's a place for them. Does this kid make the back end of a roster? What is he truly doing? Is he the third or is he the fourth linebacker? Does he contribute on teams? Yes. And he's a smart football player, but where do you draw that line? And again, I'll be interested. Your guys pulling it up here. I mean, was he projected in the 4th round? Was he projected in the 5th round?
Yeah, he didn't even make grinding the mocks, right? So neither of these last 2 guys did. So they're pick 50 or later. Both of them. I mean, yeah, you're talking 3rd or 4th round at best, right? I mean, I'm trying to remember actually where and we don't have to wonder these things anymore. when you think about overachiever, I think, the quintessential guy is Zach Thomas, and Zach Thomas was the 154th pick in the draft by the Dolphins, right? So like, that's top of the mark as far as overachievers, right? So, when we talk about that, like, are you really going to want to take a guy with a day 2 pick when you're looking at it, you're looking at possibly the best case scenario being guys who are picked later
Look, man,
in history.
it's a good point. I mean, look, I look back, I just happen to be looking at the linebackers that were there in the Falcons during our time there. And I was thinking, man, you look at a guy that we missed on, some of the third rounders, right? That's a tough spot to be in too, right? Third round. What do you truly expect? We had Akeem Dent, third round. We had, we had Duke Riley. From LSU. We thought Duke was going to be a really good football player for us. He has played a little bit in Philly, right? I don't know. What is he? We didn't think he was going to be a stud star, but we thought we could get out some serious production from him, right?
Yeah, you drafted him. It felt like you drafted him for depth and to be your third linebacker.
Yes, we did.
In a league that was trending away. But yeah, Riley has played. He's been on the Dolphins the last 2 years. He's gotten play time.
What was he on?
He was on Philly. He's kind of a depth linebacker in the league, which
he's a depth linebacker, and he's got his story. You cheer for him, of course. He had a lot of pressure on him from his father and his family, and so that's a whole other story. But then you flip it around, and we're very proud of the fact that we snap a guy like Foye Oluokun, and now obviously he left Atlanta and he's at Jacksonville now, right? And he's doing his thing.
In the last, in your tenure there, you drafted 3 linebackers that ended up not top of the market deals, but you're talking about better than 80% of the market deals, right? Like Oluokun was a $15 million a year guy. Deion Jones was top of the market. Yeah, you guys re-signed, and then Campbell, you guys let go. He went to Arizona, and then he went to Green Bay, but ultimately got a $10 million per year deal. That's a pretty impressive crop. But to your point, like, they didn't do all of it with Atlanta because it's so hard to, you draft. It's your job as general manager to draft talent. It's the job of the coach and the general manager to, initiate that talent into the team.
Yeah.
And you guys had a lot of changes. You guys changed defensive coordinators a few times, even in Dan Quinn's, tenure. So it's just hard to find success that way at times. But those players were certainly hits, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. The changing of coordinators, the changing of systems back to our earlier time. It's not easy, of course. Sometimes you land them. Sometimes what's one man's treasure is another man's junk. I hate saying that about players, but some guys come in and they're like, I love this guy. What do you guys? I can't believe you picked this guy up in the 4th or 5th or 6th round. And then someone else who you picked him, they didn't realize how limited he might have been.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it comes down, for everyone to know this, it comes down to very, very important clarity in the system. And the problem is sometimes around draft time, you could be doing something. And if all of a sudden, you're working on something, your staff is like, we're going to make a change here leading into the training camp, or, a couple games in, all of a sudden you're sitting people that you drafted to be legit contributors who are no longer fits. It's a bear that way for sure.
And so to plug our company, Sumer Sports, like, we want to be able to make those transitions using data as seamless as possible, and possibly avoid those, right, as much as possible, and just to have the pivot points and say, look, you guys might have signed Brandon Fusco to be an outside zone guy, and he can be fine there. But if you guys start trying to run gap, you're bleeped, right? So and to have the data to support that is important, and to be able to make job descriptions for these players that are data driven and robust is a really important tool, because that way, I think one of the areas of strife in organizations is just expectations not being there, but expectations being unclear, right? And expectations of players, but also expectations of decision makers. And with data, we can make that better. So, okay, we're almost done here, but we're gonna go through our favorite, or you're gonna go through your top linebackers. I'm gonna go through linebackers that I think back on fondly as some of my favorite players at the position. So Which one? Who wants to go first?
You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, so
It's your choice.
one of my top 5 favorite linebackers of all time is Derek Brooks, Tampa Bay.
Yep. Okay.
Like the quintessential cover 2 will.
Quintessential cover 2 will.
Lance
Yeah.
Briggs, Cato June. You had like all
Nice.
like
Yep.
and Lance Briggs was Lance Briggs was great, but Derek Brooks was the prototype. By the way, drafted, everybody craps on Gruden for winning a Super Bowl with Dungy's players. Sam Weiss drafted Warren Sapp, John Lynch, and Derek Brooks.
Yeah.
Before Dungy.
Are we going back and forth here? Or was that how we're doing?
Let's alternate.
Okay. Okay. We're going to alternate. So, and is this your 5th best or your best? Nothing. Not 3rd.
Yeah, I would, let's say unordered, but you can order them. Let's start with your first, and then we'll can go.
Well, I don't want to go with my first. I kind of want to build up a little bit. So
okay, go with your 5th then.
Okay, fifth favorite is Jack Lambert, right? Classic inside, no teeth MF, rocking it, doing everything that we grew up in the 70s watching. You guys are way too young for that, of course, but he set such a tone for us in how we thought linebackers should be when we first started scouting. We always say, we always go back to those guys that are so ingrained in our minds, those of us who have a long history of scouting, and we use a guy like that as, the Jack Lambert type.
Mm-hmm.
Our generation can talk about it, and we are dating ourselves, or I'm dating myself. You could never do that in today's world. They'd be like, "Yeah, isn't that old dude from?"
Is that guy okay? Like, is probably the question. Is he like? I remember my high school coach being like, "Yeah, you're like," he said to one of my friends, actually, "You're too smart to be a Mike linebacker," which is more of like which is weird because those are the smartest players in the defense.
Yeah.
But like one of them, but like it was more like you're too smart to put yourself through this, right? Like, and that always felt like linebacker to me. Okay, and again, we are going to date ourselves here. So I went with Derek Brooks. I'm gonna go. One of my next favorite was, and this one's kind of straightforward. By the way, I'm not gonna do kind of edgy players like Lawrence Taylor, although you can. But I think of Lawrence Taylor as kind of an edge in today's game. I'm thinking more off ball. Junior Seau of the at that point the San Diego Chargers, to me, played the game the way that you want to play the game, did everything. Like, he got that Chargers team to the Super Bowl in 1994 with Stan Humphries at quarterback. That's an impressive football player.
You're killing me on not being able to use LT because that's...
But you can use LT all you want. Like,
no,
I'm just saying, yeah. I'm not. And I don't want to diss him. Like, I'm saying it. I'm getting out ahead so no one says, "Oh, you didn't like Lawrence Taylor." Of course, I like Lawrence Taylor. It was more of like a different, thing for me.
Well, Lawrence did his thing, and he did it with, with and without substance, and he did it all the time. So, he's got his own place in the world, of course. Okay, I'm going backwards. So my next one is Brian Urlacher. I love him. Can I use him, or are you gonna like?
Yeah, you can have him.
Okay.
So Urlacher, college safety, college kick returner, goes to the Bears and kind of immediately makes that defense into really, when you think about, like, I talk about cover 2 wills, he was the cover 2 Mike, right?
Yeah. He was, and he was another tough ass guy who was going to come downhill and blow you up. He was consistent. He was tough. Yeah, when he put his weight on, of course, it was fun watching him as a safety. I remember those conversations, and I remember going into the draft. Can you look up right now where we're going? What was his exact draft year?
2000.
2000?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember, it was crazy because I was at the Browns during that time, and I remember all the discussions about a guy like this. What is he truly going to play? How is he going to project in the NFL? And obviously, he did what he did, and I think he's a damn good linebacker to use as a gauge. But again, he's got some old school to him, right?
Yeah, it's amazing, by the way, given your hair, that you'll never have to deal with this. But Brian Urlacher, also one of the great hair restoration stories of all time. If you ever drive through the Chicagoland area and look at any of the billboards, Urlacher, once bald, now not so bald now that he's a politician in the Illinois state of Illinois. Not that you're ever going to have to worry about that, Thomas, but for me, somebody like me, who's conscious about that, Urlacher, a great hair restoration story, of course. Here's one that I'm going to go with, or here's one of my 5 favorite linebackers of all time, and here's a guy. I think about those Saints teams in the 80s with Jim Mora, the Soul Patrol, the 4 linebackers. This one in Ricky Jackson, you had Pat Swilling, Sam Mills. Sam Mills to me, like a 5'10", 5'11" linebacker, kind of that like they didn't make the playoffs until 1987, those Saints teams, and then he went to Carolina. Carolina's immediately in the NFC title game in year 2 of the franchise. That's a player. I know he's passed now. Like that's a linebacker to me, like that leadership when you're overcoming the fact that you're deficient in a lot of places physically, but you're just an amazing person to lead a defense.
Yeah, no, love his story. Love it. It's sad, right? But that's a good one. I like that. That's not kind of one that everyone's going to pull out of their hat, right? So I like that you have the cojones to pull that out, man. It's all good. I would say my next is I'm going to say Micah Parson. Can I say that?
He's the modern day LT to be hyperbolic, I guess.
Yeah, I have to have these linebackers in here because there's so many other linebackers that don't impact the way that he does. I love this guy. I love how he plays. I love that he plays for my good dude, my good buddy there, Dan Quinn. I call him every once in a while. I'm like, damn, what if we would have had this guy in Atlanta? Will we still be here? Because he is such a fan of this player. Because yes, you can rush him. You can also send him up the middle. He can do anything. Like he's literally that kind of an athlete. That's why I'd argue, that LT should be involved in this just because of what they did and the impact that they made being a linebacker. So anyway, I think it's important for us to recognize a modern day guy who just can tear it up, and he is a massive impact. Like what he's going to make in his contract, where he's going to go with that is going to be really, really cool.
He had a really good measure in the metric where we basically looked at how well somebody avoids biting on play action. He was even good at that, which you think about from a player who likes to rush the passer, who likes to blitz. When he was assigned to cover, he was very discerning there. So he's just an absolute A+ player, through the metrics and stuff. Okay. This one people might not get the reference, but I implore all of you to go back and watch these NFL films because the early 90s Eagles defenses, even the Bud Carson post Buddy Ryan, but a lot of great players there. Reggie White, Jerome Brown, rest his soul, Reggie White too, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
There was a linebacker on that team named William Thomas who was my favorite player when I was watching football in the mid 90s. William Thomas in one season had 7 interceptions as a linebacker, and then the next season had 5.5 sacks. He was an All-Pro twice, or Pro Bowler twice, All-Pro guy. But those Eagles defenses, when they went from Buddy Ryan to Bud Carson, then to Ray Rhodes, they were always really good and always really tough. And I loved William Thomas because it sort of like showed me that what a linebacker could be in a way that like everybody there, whether it was like William Fuller or whatever, like all the tough guys. And then William Thomas was this like tall, rangy, athletic linebacker who was just making life miserable on offenses. And to me, he didn't get enough credit. So I'm going to give him a credit here. I think he was amazing I think he was a precursor to a lot of the stuff the Lance Briggses and the Derek Brookses. He was maybe ahead of his time in that way, but one of my favorites.
That's a good one. He might've been ahead of his time. No, he could tear it up. He was one of those guys that caught your attention for sure. I like it. I like some of your picks here. I think they're an interesting group. I'm gonna pop in everyone's guy here, and you're probably waiting. I wonder, you haven't mentioned him yet. I'm surprised. Maybe you're saving him for one, but I don't know. Of course, Ray Lewis. I mean, how do you walk away from, lauding Ray Lewis as being one of the best ever? I think maybe you don't like his personality, and maybe you're still thinking, you're moving into Atlanta and you don't want to acknowledge. I don't know. I mean, but I think I think he's a top-notch football player, of course. and the way that he also led, combination of everything. So I got to go with Ray there. I mean, his ability to make plays all over the field, play all downs, and do what he did for as long as he did. I can't remember exactly how long he played.
Yeah, he won the Super Bowl in 2012, and then he retired. So he won one. He was the first draft pick in the history of the Ravens franchise, and then he played in the last Ravens Super Bowl. So that's kind of how that one works. So he and you think about this, like that was your Browns team that moved to Baltimore. First two number one picks, Ray Lewis and Jonathan Ogden. Not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. Ozzie. Was that Ozzie?
Yeah, a wizard there. And Ray was great. Here, okay. Again, I'm going with my favorites less than I'm going with maybe greatness. I again was such a huge fan of these defenses when I was watching football, and this is sort of kind of the Patriots before you, but I was a huge fan of Pete Carroll's Jets defenses. And one of the best players on that defense that did multiple things. So 14 career interceptions, 52 and a half sacks, multiple Pro Bowls, was a defensive player of the year. Also, by the way, could be responsible, Thomas, for your 2 Super Bowl rings. Mo Lewis.
Wow. Okay. Could be.
Mo Lewis. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Mo Lewis infamously knocked Drew Bledsoe out and started Tom Brady's career. And but Mo Lewis was one of those kind of did everything linebackers, right? And like I don't think because those Jets teams didn't have the best success because they went, Bruce Coslet to one of my favorite characters of all time, but not a great coach, is Rich Kotite, and then Pete Carroll, and then it was the tuna, Belichick and Parcells and stuff. He was great that entire time. And I don't think and then people always remember him because he knocked Drew Bledsoe out on the sideline in that one game. But I think one of my favorite linebackers of all time.
It's tough for someone of my generation not to mention Lawrence Taylor, and I feel like I'm not playing the game right, but it's just really complicated for me to deal with my people. What was that? Mention Luke? Who did we say?
Yeah, Kuechly's one of my favorite too. I just think that he's he obviously could be first ballot Hall of Famer. So certainly deserving of recognition and praise.
He is, no question. Anyway, so I'm coming up at 4 because I don't feel like you want me to play the game with LT, but I have to mention him like everyone else does. We don't even need to spend time on it because it's different. And honestly, Junior Seau was in there for me as another guy, but you already brought him up. So look, it's an interesting position because again, some of us grew up with some studs that were so ingrained in our minds. And I think later in these generations, I don't know if they hold the same cachet. Maybe they do, but maybe I'm not feeling it the same way.
No, I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this exercise. And maybe we should have did it for running backs because I think that the linebacker position held more mystique, right? When you talked about the Bears and the Lovie Smith Bears, you were talking about Urlacher and Briggs. When you talked about the Bucks, you were talking about Brooks. When you talked about the Niners, you were talking about Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis. They were synonymous. Ray Lewis was the face of the Ravens for a decade, right? Or 2 decades almost. And like nowadays, I think you have Fred Warner, you have other guys that are, making a lot of money, but like which linebacker is the face of his team? It's really not the way it goes anymore. And I think that presents a challenge for team builders.
Well, look, we could go on and on about this. Take all the teams through the 80s and 90s. You can take Chris Spielman, at your beloved Lions these days. Hell of a football player, tough, just everything about him. Mike Singletary, we didn't mention Mike Singletary, right? I mean, Mike had his, he had his place in history for sure. He was a downhill dude, man, and would rip it up, which was amazing that things didn't work out for him as a head coach in this league, right? I think everyone assumed like this is a guy to take it and run. Obviously, it didn't happen, but it comes back to again the Ray Nitschkes of the world. So we had such history with these guys, and again, these are names that a lot of people haven't really even watched, or they've watched historic football like you do. You sit around in the middle of doing your work with that in the background. You look, I get it, but yeah, I don't know why. I mean, I don't know why. There's just, again, the mystique is not there in the same way it used to be.
Yeah, it's tough. Like you talk about, and we'll finish up here. Like Chris Spielman, you watch old Lions games. Chris Spielman came out in dime. It's
Yeah.
just they played dime so little because there was so fewer wide receivers that, like Matt Millen, like again, I'm going to show my nerdery here, but like Matt Millen was a starter for the Washington Commanders in 1991, and they didn't dress him in the Super Bowl against Buffalo. Why? Because Buffalo ran the run and shoot,
Think about
and
it.
and so he was a fixture on that team. But and there were a couple teams: the Lions with the silver stretch, the Falcons, your Falcons with the red gun, the Oilers with the run and shoot with Glanville and Mouse Davis, I think, and then Miles
Yep.
Davis is the Lions, but like there were a few teams where like these big linebackers couldn't play against them, and that's why the run and shoot was an edge. But for the most part, these linebackers, even if they were big, they were playing against two wide receivers every down, so they were playing all the time, even if they were limited. Now teams are so good at stretching out linebackers' limitations that they don't play much, which is unfortunate and different, of course.
Right. Well said. Appreciate it. I know we're coming to the end here. We're at 101.
Yeah, well, like once I know it starts getting a little dark in the office, that's when I know it's time for me to close shop. So, okay, we have a week from tomorrow is the draft. This space is where to find our live draft show. It'll be myself. It'll be Thomas. We're going to be Matt Stopsky on the sticks helping us produce. We're going to go through the entire first round from a half hour before, so 7:30 Eastern until the end of the draft. We're really excited to bring that to you. Somebody said, "Where are the cleaners?" Well, you'll remember we normally go at 5, so they're long gone. So at 7:30, that's fine. Again, be at this space, subscribe, rate, and review. You'll get the draft show right there. We will also be going Monday and Wednesday next week. We're going to have Parker Fleming, Tage Seth, and Sean Syed on Monday to do their thing while Thomas and I travel and get ready for the show. Wednesday we're going to do a pre-draft final show, and then Thursday's the big day. So we really appreciate you guys all coming to hang out. Again, we appreciate all the great DMs we're getting and all the great comments. And we really appreciate the great feedback there as well. So again, subscribe, rate, review. Tell a friend to come and watch us on Thursday night. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 49 of the Sumer Sports Show.